Hi, very good morning. I'm Dr. Janak Patel, MD, General Physician. I'm still a student. I'm learning every day. So, whatever I know, I would like to share with you. And today we are going to discuss regarding one of the very interesting topic, that is IV fluids, because everyone needs to have a good knowledge regarding IV fluids. So, we'll be talking regarding that particular portion. It is called intravenous fluids, or in short we call it IV fluids. You know very well, as far as IV therapy is concerned, you can give in the form of a fluids only. You cannot give solid or semi-solid material. You have to give a fluid in a proper pattern. Now there are a lot of questions which are there. Can we give pure water? Can we prepare a mixture of food material and give it IV? Or can we give any liquid which is in a fluid stage? Can you give IV? So this person is thinking of, can you give this in a fluid stage? Can you give this? Can you give alcohol? Can you give drinks, fruit juices, etc. in the form of IV? And this person thinks, can you give dollar or a rupee in the form of IV? Answer is always no. Because for an IV fluid, you require the fluid to be sterile. You require it to be isotonic, means the osmotic pressure, or we call osmolality of that IV fluid, should be almost parallel with osmolality of your blood, because you are giving intravenous and it has to be in a fluid state. Plus, depending upon the indication, you require that material to be present in the form of a fluid state. Person may require sodium, potassium, chloride, dextrose or bicarbonate, depending upon your requirement. And these are the common material which are available in IV fluids. If you see, out of 5 patients who is receiving IV fluid suffers from complications due to inappropriate fluid administration. And this was published in 2015. I'll not say 1 out of 5. I'll say more than 20% suffers from complication because of improper selection of IV fluid. We call wrong fluid to a wrong person at a wrong time and wrong amount of fluid. Those produces complications. So you require to know when to give, what to give, how much to give, and what not to give. These are all the questions which you should solve. And there are a lot of fluids which are available in market. There are more than 200 different types of IV fluids in different forms, different companies, different permutation combinations are available. So we'll be talking under different heading: introduction, what is IV fluids, when to give, that is indication, contraindication, what to give, that is selection, types, how much to give, that is quantity or volume, how to give, that is method, IV or intraosseous, or there are other methods, how fast, speed, or we call rate, when to stop or how long to give, and then little idea regarding complication, and then we'll go through some of the special cases which you come across in your everyday practice, and that will be in the quiz form. So let us start with IV fluids. What is IV fluid? So for that you should have a good knowledge. Say this person is having a knowledge of around 33%. She is a trained nurse. She is having a knowledge of IV fluids, components, when to give, how much to give, around 50%. This is not enough. What you require? You require 100% knowledge of IV fluids. Simultaneously regarding electrolyte balance, imbalance, how much to give, when to give, which form to give, how fast to be given, etc. And also regarding acid-base balance. Because whenever you give IV fluids, along with IV fluids, you create electrolyte disturbance and acid-base imbalance also. And already the person may be having some amount of electrolyte imbalance as well as acid-base imbalance. So selection of IV fluid, how fast, how much, how long to be given, etc. Your knowledge should be almost 100%. So let us first go through what we call as a water balance, because anything you give has to be in the form of a water or what we call as a liquid, and the best material which is being utilized for IV is water. So everything is put in water and then you are giving that IV fluids. So we go through a very simple thing. So you require a nice balance between input and output. Your body contains 60% in a fluids form, of which 2/3 is in intracellular, 1/3 is in extracellular, and out of that 1/3, 75% is interstitial and 25% is in plasma. So if we roughly look, 40% of the body weight is in intracellular form. So if you take 100 kg person, 40 kg is intracellular, 20 kg is in extracellular, and of that 20 kg, 15%, that is 15 kg in interstitial, and 5 kilo, or we call 5% of body weight in plasma. So approximately we say that 40% of body weight is in intracellular, 20% in extracellular. Of that you divide into 2, 15 and 5, and that is in interstitial and plasma. Now there is one more compartment which can also accumulate fluid in some of the disease, in some of the conditions like intestinal obstruction, severe pancreatitis, peritonitis, major venous obstruction, capillary leak syndrome, burns, etc., where you can have accumulation of fluid in peritoneal cavity, particularly in case of peritonitis, severe pancreatitis, in pleural cavity, in case of we call right side failure, hydrothorax, pleural effusion, hemothorax, etc. In pericardial sac, you can have secondary due to inflammation of pericardium or even a hydropericardium in case of right side failure, or even in major venous obstruction like superior vena cava obstruction. And it can be collected in GI tract like intestinal obstruction, volvulus, those particular condition, and in subcutaneous tissue in case of burns and capillary leak syndrome. So water gain is equal to water loss. Almost in a everyday food and drinks we take 2.2 liters per day, and from metabolism we get 300 ml per day, which accounts for 2.5 liter, of which if you consider insensible loss 900 ml by skin and lungs, urine around 1.5 liter, and in stool 100 ml, which will account to 2.5 liter. So approximately input is equal to output, and that maintains your water balance. So anything which increases the water gain in the form of drinking water or from food or by increased metabolism, by and large it is easily thrown out. Excess will be easily thrown out by kidney in the form of a urine, or will be lost little bit in the form of a stool or in the form of a skin, that is sweating. But more water gain is usually there because of retention. and then it becomes excess of water gain, where loss from these structures reduces. So if water loss reduces, then you will have excess of water gain, and that will produce increase in water content of the body, and that will be accumulated in extracellular fluid compartment. And if it shifts to intracellular compartment, we get what we call as edema, and that is cellular edema, like cerebral edema, pulmonary edema, etc. And if there is an excess of loss, water loss is more than water gain, then you start developing decrease in blood volume, decrease in extracellular fluid volume, and also decrease in intracellular. And if you lose more volume from blood, we usually use a terminology hypovolemia, and that can produce hypotension and even sometimes shock stage. If you lose from cell, intracellular fluid is lost. We call that as dehydration, and that can produce decrease in cellular function, and this can produce a damage. Same way, if there is an excess of water which is accumulated in intravascular compartment, we call as a hypervolemia. But if it is accumulated in extracellular fluid compartment, we call edema. And we commonly use the term if it is in large area, we call generalized anasarca. And if it is accumulated in intracellular compartment, then we use the term intracellular edema, and that usually commonly we come across in brain, we call cerebral edema, in lung, in a alveolar cavity and paraalveolar structures we call as a pulmonary edema, etc. And that produces damage to the function of those particular organs. So whatever we drink will be absorbed from GI tract, part of the things will be thrown out in fecal matter, it will go into intravascular compartment, and it will mix with the blood. This fluid will exchange into actually we call as extracellular fluid compartment, and from extracellular fluid it can exchange with intracellular fluid compartments, as well as there is also exchange from fluid, that is from intravascular it can enter into the extracellular fluid compartment, becomes a lymph, and that lymph will be further given back into intravascular compartment. And this exchange mainly takes place between intravascular, we have got another diagram, we'll show you this. This is intravascular compartment into interstitial. Part of the fluid will be going back depending upon the osmolality back into bloodstream, that is intravascular. It can exchange with the cell, that is called transcellular fluid, that will become what we call as extracellular fluid compartments or transcellular fluid, that is third space. From interstitial, part of the fluid can become lymph, and that part will be finally given back to intravascular compartment, and depending upon the extracellular fluid osmolality, it can exchange with cell, that is intracellular fluid. So these are the exchanges which can take place. From intravascular it can exchange only with interstitial fluid, or we call as a extracellular fluid compartment, and this can exchange with transcellular compartment, intracellular compartment, and lymph. But lymph cannot give back to extracellular. There is interchange between transcellular and intracellular, but there is no interchange from lymphatic back into interstitial compartment unless there is a lymphatic obstruction. Fluid volume is regulated by many factors. I am not going into detail. By means of thirst, blood volume can stimulate, osmolality can stimulate the regulatory mechanism, blood pressure, and this can stimulate RAS system, can stimulate hormonal regulation, ADH secretions, BNP secretion. So blood volume can stimulate all this. So mainly blood volume, blood pressure, even electrolyte can also stimulate regulatory system and can increase or decrease the fluid volume, or what we call as a blood volume. So it is by hypothalamus or by pituitary by releasing what we call as a ADP, adrenal cortex, renal regulation by RAS system, cardiac regulation by BNP and ANP, gastrointestinal regulation, and insensible water loss. There are all this mechanism and maintains your fluid volume, or we call as blood volume and osmolality. Along with that, electrolyte can also produce, acid-base imbalance can also produce some effect on fluid volume. You should know that in extracellular compartment, sodium is highest and potassium is highest in intracellular compartment. This is very, very important. So sodium is more outside the cell, and inside the cell potassium is very high. While magnesium is a second cation which is highest in intracellular compartment, while outside it is only 3 milliequivalent. Chloride is also more outside. So outside the cell, sodium chloride is highest. You can see sodium is 142, chloride is 103. While intracellular is mainly potassium and magnesium. These two are highest. Another compound which is intracellular which is very high is phosphate. But if you look at the osmolality, intracellular as well as extracellular should be maintained. This disparity of sodium and potassium is being maintained by what we call as an ATP activated sodium potassium pump. If you take a plasma osmolality, it is 285, and for calculation of that, 2 times sodium plus glucose divided by 18 and blood urea divided by 2.8. So if you calculate by this, it comes approximately to 285 to 290. So our plasma osmolality is between 285 to 290. So we require an adequate plasma osmolality to maintain RBC, because if it becomes hypo, RBC will absorb more water inside and it can rupture, and opposite of that, if it becomes more concentrated, that is osmolality increases, then from RBC fluid, that is water, will come out and RBC will shrink in size. That will be the effect on an RBC. And this change in osmolality in intravascular compartment and extracellular compartment, if they don't match, there will be exchange of different materials by means of either distribution, either by osmosis, or because of an active cycle like sodium potassium pump. And that active sodium potassium pump will be acting at the level of intracellular level, at the cell wall level. So that is acting at that level, while between extracellular and intravascular compartment as well as extracellular and intracellular compartment, two things are working together. That is diffusion, osmosis are working, while active transport is acting, which requires an energy which is called ATP mediated active transport, that will be working at the level of cell, that is at the cell level. What is diffusion? Diffusion means solute which moves across the semi-permeable membrane from a concentrated to a un or dilute level. You can see here, and then balance is being maintained. It becomes equal on the two sides. that is called diffusion. This is osmosis. You can see in a previous. Now here there is increased water with less quantity of solute, while here there is concentrated. So water will move from this compartment to this compartment. You can see this, and this will make equal osmotic pressure compared to this. So that is what we call as osmosis. So in osmosis, water moves, while in diffusion, solute will move from high concentration. And this is a diagram showing you active transport. Because of ATP mediated, it will try to maintain the balance between sodium and potassium. So it will try to maintain intracellular potassium more and extracellular sodium more. So from the cell, sodium will be thrown out and potassium will be transported into intracellular compartment. And that is how you get maintenance of sodium and potassium balance inside the cell and outside the cell. I already explained you, if there is an hypertonic fluid outside the cell, meaning concentration, less quantity of water, more quantity of solute, that will draw the fluid from the cell. So cell will become dehydrated, and that will happen if you put hypertonic solution in intravascular compartment. And if you put a hypotonic solution, it is containing more water, so that water will shift from intravascular to extracellular fluid and from extracellular fluid into intracellular, producing increase in water compartment in intracellular, which will produce cellular edema. Now while giving different types of IV fluid, you have to know how much quantity of water will be retained in intravascular compartment and how much will be shifted into extracellular fluid compartment and then into intracellular. This is normal, this is 40%, this is 15, this is 5. So this is intracellular is 40, extracellular is 15, intravascular is say 5. So extracellular fluid compartment is 20, total is 20. But out of the 20, 5 is intravascular. Now if you give dextrose, this dextrose get metabolized. Now that water, only 83 ml will be retained in intravascular, 250 ml will be retained in extracellular, and rest will be shifted into intracellular, which will produce edema. Hence, dextrose works like pure water. It is a hypotonic solution. So whenever you give a hypotonic solution, the chances of intracellular edema will increase, and increase in intravascular compartment will be very, very minimal. In case of isotonic solution, out of 1 liter of fluid, 700 will be retained in extracellular fluid compartment and 300 will be retained in intravascular compartment, and there will be no change in intracellular compartment. Hence, isotonic solutions are more preferred to maintain your intracellular fluid compartment and to increase intravascular compartment. But when you give colloid like blood transfusion, it will be totally retained in intravascular compartment, no change in extracellular, no change in intracellular compartment. If you remember this diagram, this becomes very, very easy. Again, I am repeating. If you give hypotonic solution, the fluid will be distributed in all compartments but maximum in intracellular. That is around 666 ml in intracellular, producing cellular edema or organ edema. 250 ml in extracellular, which will produce peripheral edema, and only 83 ml will be retained out of 1 liter in intravascular compartment. So volume expansion will be very, very minimum. While in isotonic saline, it will expand by 300 ml and extracellular fluid by 700 ml. So this will be by isotonic solutions. And if you give a colloid it will expand your intravascular compartment by total 100%. So if you give 1 liter, it will expand intravascular compartment by 1 liter. It will add 1 liter in that. So that is best when you get hypovolemia and shock stage. So colloid is preferred in shock stage with hypovolemia, but also there are some disadvantages we'll be discussing further. So still crystalloid is preferred in a shock stage when you want to increase your intravascular compartment. There are some advantages, some disadvantages. So same thing what we have shown you before. Colloid will be 100% retained in blood. If you give isotonic saline, it will be partly preserved in blood. It will expand by 300 ml and 700 ml will be transferred to what we call, here we have already shown you, 700 ml will be transferred to what we call as an extracellular fluid compartment. Clear? Right? And when you give glucose, large quantities transferred into intracellular compartment, that is approximately we have shown you before here, almost 666 ml, 250 ml into extracellular and only 83 ml, very small quantity will be transferred in plasma or we call blood. So this will give less volume expansion, more intracellular expansion, while saline will never expand intracellular. It will increase your extracellular fluid compartment and then depending upon the requirement, it will be shifting that into intracellular compartment. While colloid will be totally retained in plasma, there will be no change in extracellular or we call interstitial compartment and intracellular compartment. So that is colloid, this is saline and this is glucose, will be acting on all the three compartments, which is dangerous one sometime. So when you give glucose, 10% remains in IV. Out of 1 liter, approximately we say 100 ml. It is from 83 to 100 ml. Crystalloid, 25% remains in IV, approximately we call 300 ml from 1 liter. And in colloid, all 1000 will be retained in plasma. So it is a best material to expand your intravascular compartment in a case of a hypovolemia. So when you give hypotonic, very small quantities retained in blood, rest is shifted into extracellular and then into intracellular compartment. But colloid being isotonic and cannot be transferred from blood vessel into extracellular, it remains in blood. While depending upon the type of solution what you use, if you use isotonic, if you use hypertonic, it will draw water from extracellular fluid into intravascular compartment and will reduce extracellular fluid compartment. And if you give hypertonic, that will also do the same thing. It will shift from extracellular compartment into intravascular compartment and it will increase the volume of blood or we call intravascular compartment and may end up with pulmonary edema. These are some of the material which is mentioned here. In a hypotonic, classical example is dextrose, 5% plain dextrose and half normal saline. These are two classical examples of hypotonic. So while giving this, you should keep it in mind, you are creating increase in intracellular compartment. So this will be a drug of a choice or IV fluid of a choice only in case of severe dehydration. While isotonic is the best solution to maintain your IV compartment, that is normal saline, Ringer lactate. Never use plasmolite because it contains lot of electrolytes, and if you don't have a good knowledge of that, you can create electrolyte and acid base imbalance. As far as hypertonic solution is concerned, we have got two. One, hypertonic saline, which is mainly available in the form of a 3% saline, which is only utilized in case of hyponatremia, while 25% dextrose and 50% dextrose is utilized mainly in case of hypoglycemia. So this becomes specialized solution in selective condition. So 3% saline is mainly utilized in person with a hyponatremia, severe hyponatremia, and 25% dextrose in person with hypoglycemia. Ionic wise, you can divide. This does not contain any ion like sodium, potassium, chloride, etc. So these are called non-ionic solutions. So if you don't want to give any electrolytes, or you don't want to give any anions or cations, you can use plain simple 5% dextrose, but it is plain simple water. And when you want to give saline, sodium, or you want to give chloride, then normal saline, you want to give energy with saline, then dextrose saline, and you want to give little amount of potassium, Ringer lactate. So these are the three main solutions which are commonly utilized in everyday practice. We call normal saline, dextrose saline, or we call dextrose normal saline, and Ringer lactate. This is hypertonic ideally, but when dextrose is utilized, it becomes isotonic. Ringer lactate is also isotonic. So these three are the main IV fluids which are commonly being utilized, and we'll be talking about those three fluids as we go further. So these are the common types of fluids which are being available. You can divide depending upon the hypotonic, isotonic, hypertonic, or without cation, anion, means without sodium, potassium, bicarbonate, chloride, etc. are dextrose, while containing sodium, potassium, chloride, those are normal saline, dextrose normal saline, or we call DNS, Ringer lactate plus plasmalite. But usually I'll be talking very less regarding plasmolites. In plasmolite you got M, G, E, etc. Regarding fluid volume, already we have mentioned to you there will be two type of presentation which you will come across very frequently: decrease in fluid volume or increase in fluid volume. Decrease in fluid volume you can divide into dehydration and hypovolemia. Hypovolemia means decrease in the blood volume, and dehydration means decrease in the intracellular fluid compartment. Two separate conditions. This dehydration will be manifested by means of a loss of skin turgors, etc. While hypovolemia will be decrease in the blood volume, decrease in the weight, and decrease or fall of blood pressure. And that will also produce indirectly concentrated urine, decrease in the urine output, and symptom signs because of hypotension, or person may show you symptom signs of shock stage. And when intracellular fluid compartment is reduced, you get symptom signs of dehydration. So these are the two separate parts, but part of decrease in fluid volume. Initially you get hypovolemia, followed by you get symptom signs of dehydration. And hypovolemia will also produce hypotension, and if there is a severe hypovolemia, you can get even shock stage. So I've already told you, excessive loss from extracellular fluid will reduce the osmotic pressure. So from extracellular fluid compartment, as the water is reduced, osmotic pressure will increase. So that will draw the water from cell, and this cell will shrink. This we call as a dehydration. This will decrease the intravascular compartment, we call as a hypovolemia. And because it decreases the blood volume, cardiac output is decreased, hypotension and shock stage, and that will produce symptom signs because of hypovolemia. And because of dehydration, now cell function will be affected, and that stage we call as a dehydration. So you know very well, dehydration is very frequently because of high fever, hot climate, cystic fibrosis, vomiting, diarrhea, fluid loss because of burns, post-surgical, loss of fluid by means of increased urine output like diabetes mellitus, ketoacidosis, inadequate intake, inability to drink because of oral conditions, or inadequate access to water. These are all the conditions which will produce decrease input, increase output, will produce imbalance, and that will produce loss of fluid. But gain in fluid will be usually resulting into hypervolemia or hypervolemia, and that hypervolemia will increase your blood volume. Because of increase in the blood volume, increase in the cardiac output, and may even elevate your blood pressure. So excess of fluid volume in intravascular compartment, we use the word hypervolemia. And when you increase the fluid overload and produces excess of body fluid, we call overhydration. So overhydration indirectly is increase in the fluid volume in the body, total body fluid volume. And that will produce two compartment will have increase in fluid content, intravascular and extracellular. Because of intravascular, you will get hypervolemia. Because of extracellular, which is present in interstitial and intracellular. In interstitial, it produces edema, and we use the word generalized anasarca when it is extensive. But when it is inside the cell, we call it a cellular edema. Depending upon the organ, we use the word cerebral edema, pulmonary edema, etc. So when you get excess of water inside the cell, we call as cellular edema. When there is an increase in extracellular fluid compartment, we call as a edema. And if it is in lot of area, we call as generalized anasarca. So these are all the different words utilized for what we call is an excess of fluid volume. This can be because of sodium and water retention, increase intake of sodium, increase intake of water, SIDH, AKI, CKD, congestive heart failure, person who is taking non-steroidal and anti-inflammatory drugs, steroids, increase aldosterone level, maybe primary or maybe secondary. All this condition will increase your sodium and water retention, and that will increase your blood volume as well as extracellular fluid volume. And that will give rise to this typical, it will have a neurological effects. In respiratory, it will produce pulmonary congestion and pulmonary edema. In cardiovascular, bounding pulse, elevated blood pressure, elevated JVP, presence of S3 sound tachycardia. In GI tract, fluid retention will produce anorexia, nausea, vomiting, and you will have a peripheral edema and symptom signs of generalized anasarca. All those conditions you will get. But along with fluid, there will be effect on electrolytes. So water will produce also effect on sodium, potassium and chloride. Along with specific etiology, either you will have a loss of sodium, potassium or chloride, or even without that loss, water excess will produce dilution, and that will produce dilutional hyponatremia or hypokalemia. And with disturbances in bicarbonate, it can produce acid-base imbalance. So water imbalance is invariably associated with sodium, potassium, chloride, bicarbonate and H ion disturbances, which will produce electrolyte imbalance as well as acid-base imbalance. So you have to keep a watch on that. While evaluating a patient, most important part is a history, chief complaints, physical examination, and then followed by laboratory parameters. In a history taking, very useful. So always try to take a good history from a patient's and patient relatives, whether it is acute loss, massive loss, it is a loss of water, blood or plasma, because that will produce massive loss, will produce shock stage and hemodynamically unstable. It will be the most common cause of hypovolemia. Whether there is a pure water loss, it is a water loss with other material, or it is a blood loss, or it is a plasma loss. You should try to find out and then go for clinical examination. Either it is a gradual and it is a mild loss, then usually it will not produce a shock stage. Acute loss and massive loss will produce a shock stage and hemodynamically unstable. It may produce even a shock stage. And secondary to shock stage, you will get tachycardia. You will have delay in capillary refilling time. You will have a pale mucocutaneous membranes. You will have an effect on the brain in the form of a dull mentation, weak or absent pulse because of a shock stage. This will be the common finding which you will come across in a severe hypovolemia with shock stage. And usually it is very common with acute and massive loss of water or water with electrolytes, blood, plasma, etc. But in a gradual loss, you will have a mild hypovolemia, and if it continues for a longer, you can develop hypovolemia with hypotension. But shock stage is less likely in a gradual and mild to moderate loss of fluid. But there are some conditions where you don't have any loss. Volume is being maintained, but person is still in a shock stage. It can happen in a cardiogenic, like acute myocardial infarction, severe congestive heart failure, etc. In septic shock, anaphylaxis, hypervolemic conditions like congestive heart failure, edema, etc. Whenever you get retention of fluid, you will have hypervolemia and edema, and clinically you will have an evidence of increased blood volume like congestive heart failure, portal hypertension, hypoproteinemia, all these conditions. So dehydration can be judged by skin turgor, moisture of mucous membrane, capillary refilling time, examining the sunken eyeballs. Heart rate will show you tachycardia, low volume pulse, etc. And these are the different signs which will be there, which will tell you the severity of dehydration. You can utilize this particular, you can have this particular chart in your clinic, and you can examine the clinical signs and put the percentage of dehydration. Based is a clinical judgment. You can examine indirect way by PEC cell volume, because if water is lost, PEC cell volume will increase. Total plasma protein will be also elevated, and urine specificity will be also elevated. So when all these three parameters are abnormal and elevated, it indicates loss of fluid from plasma, or we can call from blood, hypovolemic stage. And invariably these are the signs of hypovolemia. So that is hypovolemia. But dehydration can be judged by skin turgor, mucous membrane moisture, eyeball conditions like sunken eyeball, and it can be also judged by heart rate and pulse volume. So fluid state, you will have to divide into two groups. Hypovolemia can be there with loss of sodium and water, while dehydration is mainly with loss of water. Hypovolemia can produce hemodynamically unstable, while dehydration can lead to hypovolemia, and hypovolemia can be hemodynamically unstable, and patient will be usually hypernatremic. And being hypernatremic, this will produce CNS symptoms and signs. So in a pure dehydration, usually you have got hypovolemia, hemodynamically unstable, and hypernatremia. So if you see hypernatremia, it is more in favor of dehydration. But if you see normal sodium level with loss of water, so there is a loss of sodium and water together, so it does not end up with hypernatremia, and there is symptom signs of hypovolemia, that is classical hypovolemia rather than dehydration. You can also get information by fluid balance chart, that is input output chart, stool conditions, daily weight chart, etc. Investigation can be bedside by blood test, we already mentioned. You can go for total plasma, protein, packed cell volume, and urine specific gravity. Urine volume and urine specific gravity, we already shown you here. Specific gravity will be increased because of decrease in water content in urine. So you can use history and you can examine some parts like capillary refilling time, blood pressure, heart rate, JVP, and you can examine mucous membrane, skin, sodium, etc. So look for signs of hypovolemia, calculate plasma osmolality, urinary creatinine ratio, urea creatinine ratio, and venous blood gas study also can help you to identify the fluid state, whether it is hypovolemia or it is dehydration. And after assessing, you can go for treatment implication. You will have to monitor the treatment part and have a follow-up and look for the outcome of your treatment and again reassess. And there are three main parts of treatment. One is called maintenance, one is called resuscitation, and one is replacement. The meaning is very simple. If the person is having hypotension and shock stage, you have to correct that, we call as resuscitation. That is by fluid challenge. We call in the form of a bolus. Once that is corrected, now you give a fluid which is maintenance plus loss, ongoing loss, we call replacement. And after resuscitation and after replacement, once everything is corrected, either if a person is able to take orally, go to oral, or you give what we call as a maintenance fluid. So maintenance fluid can be given which requires sodium, potassium chloride, as well as for energy 100 gram per day of glucose, and you require water which is approximately 25 to 30 ml per kg per day. This is roughly a maintenance dose. So if a person is of average say 70 kg, you require 2 liters of water, and then depending upon that you will have to give millimole of sodium, potassium and chloride depending upon the weight and your daily requirement, and glucose is not more than 100 gram in a day. So this is roughly maintenance. While depending upon the vomit loss or diarrhea, you will have to give sodium. If there is a vomiting, sodium plus H ions and potassium. There is a loss of sodium, potassium and H ions. While in diarrhea you lose bicarbonate in place of H ions, but you do lose sodium as well as potassium. So we'll have to keep a watch on that. So while monitoring a fluid therapy, you will have to look for the urine output. You will have to look for the total protein level, skin turgor, blood pressure, edema, mucous membrane, color, total solids, packed cell, all this. Out of which the main important is urine output, blood pressure, skin turgor. This is a clinical finding, this is clinical finding, this is clinical finding, this is a sign of over hydration. You look at the packed cell volume. So only one which is a laboratory parameter which is being utilized is a packed cell volume, and you look at the urine output and urine specific gravity. This too becomes a very important thing. And clinically, look for blood pressure and look for pulse volume, skin turgor clinically. Look for appearance of edema, which is a sign of overhydrations. This slide I have already shown you when we have discussed acid-base imbalance. So simultaneously you should pay attention to electrolyte as well as acid-base imbalance. So this is what is preliminary part of water balance, electrolyte balance and acid base balance should be kept in mind before starting an IV therapy. So that was an introductory part. Now little idea regarding IV fluid and IV therapy. If you want to give all, you will require this many number of different IV lines. Very difficult. But intravenous therapy or IV therapy is the process in which you give an liquid substances directly into the vein. You can give either in the form of a bolus. This is usually given for resuscitation. Usually intermittent infusion is given in the form of a treatment part, mainly in the form of antibiotics or say in the form of analgesics, etc. for treatment of the disease. And continuous drip infusion is usually being given as a maintenance therapy or for replacement therapy, and this is continued till you stabilize the patient. So this is mainly utilized for replacement therapy and for maintenance therapy, while this intermittent infusion is mainly for the treatment part of the disease, and IV bolus method is mainly in the form of resuscitations. So intravenous fluid is given for many therapy for fluid for procedures. By IV fluids, you give drugs, you can do procedures. To maintain the IV line, you can use continuous drip. So you call saline wash. You give saline or you can put a heparin lock. IV fluid is given in the three main pattern: maintenance, replacement and resuscitation. I've already mentioned resuscitation is for correction of disorders like shock stage, electrolyte imbalance, which is dangerous one, or acid base imbalance, which is dangerous, or for elevating blood pressure like vasopressor drugs you want to give. Those are called resuscitation. Replacement is maintenance plus ongoing loss. And when there is no ongoing loss, plain simple fluid with little amount of energy and electrolytes to maintain daily requirement, that is called maintenance procedures. Procedure can be diagnostic or therapeutic. Diagnostic like venography, CVP, IVP, that is intravenous pyelography, intravenous urography, right heart catheterization, pulmonary angiography, etc. Those are diagnostics. Therapeutic procedures like TIPS, that is called trans, internal jugular, photosystemic shunt, thrombolysis, VA shunt, ventricular atrial shunt, ICD, or even a pacemaker, CRT, etc. You use intravenous sites, peritoneal V shunt, PV shunt, DVT, thrombectomy, varicose vein treatment, etc. You will have to go through. These are all for therapeutic purposes. So by IV line, you can give IV therapy, drugs, parenteral nutritions like total parenteral nutrition, right heart catheterization, central venous lines for measuring venous pressure, ventricular atrial shunt, tips. Also, you can utilize for blood donation like phlebotomy, blood collection for laboratory investigation, plasmapheresis, exchange transfusions. Also, you can utilize for pacing, which can be temporary or permanent, where you can use ICD, ILR, CRT, etc. Pyelography or urography, catheter treatment for ASD, VSD, PDA, paroxysmal atrial tachycardia, supraventricular tachycardia for ablation therapy, venography, many more. Now we go to the third part, that is indications, contraindications. Because what you are giving, you are sure and you know it. હલો હલો હા અત્યારે હું લેક્ચર કરું છું એટલે થોડીક વાર પછી કરજે હા પછી કરજે હા ઓકે ચાલ હા So accurate control, so you can give a calculated quantity of material IV. You can have a control on giving what you are giving. You can have a predictable response. You get an immediate response, but it is directly given into intravenous, which will be distributed depending upon your requirement, and it is a prompt corrections. You can have a correction in electrolyte, acid base balance, water balance, etc. So it is indicated in a person who is not able to take orally, like in an unconscious person, nil by mouth during surgery or post surgical, where he is supposed to be nil by mouth, particularly abdominal surgery or GI tract surgery. In a person with severe dehydration and shock stage, or even in a person who has got hypovolemia. The most common cause of loss of fluid is because of vomiting and diarrhea. In that conditions, particularly severe vomiting and diarrhea. In hypoglycemia, to correct hypoglycemia, for giving certain antibiotics, analgesics, or other medications like vasopressor drugs, etc. In particularly person with what we call as a normovolumic or euvolumic shock stage. In a person who are on total parenteral nutrition, critical conditions like shock stage, cardiac arrest, forced diuresis in drug overdose or poisoning cases, etc. also it is indicated. So in water depletion, electrolyte imbalance, acid base imbalance, blood loss, maybe external or internal blood loss, or for giving drugs, fluid or special fluids, or IV lines for procedures. Also it can be utilized for giving nutrition like glucose or dextrose, total parenteral nutrition like albumin, free fatty acids, amino acids, glucose, etc. can be given. You can utilize for plasmapheresis or hemodialysis. So you can put indication for hypotension, dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, acid base imbalance, for maintenance in a person who are on operative side where they are nil by mouth for a long period, IVSS for medications, forced diuresis in poisoning cases to remove toxins. You can have a hemodialysis or plasmapheresis, etc. or in a person with a severe hypotension, etc. So hypotension, hypovolemia, decreased oxygen delivery because of hypotension and hypovolemia, old age person with organ failure, electrolyte and acid base imbalance, all those conditions. We already mentioned special condition like shock stage, cardiac arrest, cardiogenic shock, anesthesia, anaphylactic shock, spinal shock, hepatic coma, etc. In all this condition, but main important part, always remember, don't do any harm by giving IV fluid. That is the first part should be done. Diagnose first and then treat. Then decide whether he needs or not. And always have a clear indication for intervention. Then you do and you do not harm the patient. So contraindication is mainly one, absence of indications. And absolute contraindication, if the person can take orally, always try orally, don't give IV. Another contraindication is if the person, clinically you can make out the person is having a volume overload, or if person is having clinical symptom signs of congestive heart failure, pulmonary edema like left ventricular failure, cerebral edema, or person is having CKD or AKI with GFR less than 50, acute myocardial infarction, and other conditions where there is a volume overload, don't give IV fluids. If at all, if you have to give some medications IV, it has to be slow with a micro drips, etc. with all precautions. Now we go to the another most important part which is interesting for you, what to give. Always whenever you go to the market, you have got lot of choice. You want to select one, but because of lot of choice, it confuses you. There are more than 200 different types of IV fluids available in market from different company having little change in a little composition, but we mainly divide into two big groups: isotonic, hypotonic, hypertonic groups, mainly in the form of IV fluids. So you have got one choice only. It is extremely difficult, but you have to select. So for that particular purpose, you should know what is resuscitation, what is maintenance, what is replacement, and what is the treatment part. So there is no one fluid for all this. Individual requires a different types of fluids because the indication is different, the purpose is different. So for resuscitation, some fluids are better, some are not better. For maintenance, replacement, and for treatment part, you have to decide which fluid you want to give. So depending upon the type of procedure you are doing for a replacement of the fluid, whether it is resuscitation, whether it is maintenance, whether it is replacement, or whether it is treatment, the fluid quality will change and even volume will change. And that we'll be discussing in the second part after this. So as far as the quality is concerned, by and large, our body requires water, sodium, potassium, bicarbonate, etc. So all these things should be present. So a fluid which contains all these four things is always a better. But in some condition we don't require sodium. In some condition we don't require potassium. In some we don't require bicarbonate. So you will have to select a fluid depending upon what you require for that particular patient, either for maintenance or for replacement or for resuscitation. So it is extremely difficult. So any normal person, daily water requirement is 30 ml per kilogram per day. Sodium is 1 equivalent per kilogram. Potassium is 1 milliequivalent per kilogram. Approximately we say that this will be coming to 50 to 60 milliequivalent per day. Potassium is also maximum is 80 milligram in a day, not more than that. And dextrose you require 100 gram per day. So this will be for maintenance, not for resuscitation, not for replacement. For resuscitation and replacement it will change. So when you are giving a maintenance fluid, it should not contain more than this, which is your daily requirement. So 30 ml per kg, 1 milliequivalent per kg, 1 milliequivalent per kg and 100 gram per day. So it should not have more than this. And there are a lot of factors which will change your selection of a fluid, like CV status in this, what we call congestive heart failure, hypertension, myocardial infarction, cardiac arrhythmia. In all these conditions, your selection of fluid will change. In COPD, ARDS, also CNS like coma, seizures, GI tract, vomiting, loose motion, AKI, CKD, diabetes, hypertension. In diabetes, you will avoid using dextrose. In hypertension, you will avoid using sodium containing fluids. So all this will have a change in selection. Surgical condition, non-surgical condition, age, weight, water balance, electrolyte balance, acid-base balance, pregnancy, infection, etc. But by and large, we know very well, if there is a blood loss, it should be replaced by blood. If there is a plasma loss, replaced by colloid or plasma. Resuscitation fluids should be there with colloid or crystalloid. Crystalloid is a better choice than colloid. We'll give you an example why. And if you want to replace extracellular depletion, saline is always better because it will sift good quantity of water into extracellular compartment but will not sift that into intracellular. And you want to rehydrate, then plain dextrose is utilized because it will sift large quantity of water into intracellular from 1 liter nearly 666 ml. So we say close to 70 ml, 700 ml will be sifted into intracellular compartment, and that will be very good for rehydration. So dextrose has to be utilized only in case of a severe dehydration. Otherwise, it should be restricted in good number of conditions. We'll be going through all those. To divide an IV fluids, you can divide into two big groups, blood and blood products, which are to be utilized only in person with a blood loss and where you require a blood products. While non-blood IV fluids, you divide into crystalloids and colloids. Crystalloid, we have already shown you one slide before, that will be seen again in next slide, which contains glucose, electrolytes or mixture of the two. Colloid will be protein compound and non-protein compound. We call natural and synthetic. Natural is albumin, which can be 5%, 20%. Non-proteinous compounds like starch compound, that is we call Hase, pentastarch or tetrastarch. And non-starch, non-protein compound is dextran. While proteinous products we call gelatin, which is, there are two types of material available, Hemasil or gelofuscin, etc. So colloids are usually hypertonic or isotonic. Albumin 20% is hypertonic, while 5% is isotonic. While crystalloid can be iso, hypo or hypertonic. Blood products are always concentrated, they are isotonic or hypertonic. Crystalloid can be hyper, iso or hypo. Some people divides into four group: crystalloid, colloid, electrolyte free water. So they call dextrose 5% as electrolyte free water, which does not contain sodium, potassium, chloride, bicarbonate, etc. and blood. So this is one very good division which you can utilize clinically. So when you want to use colloid, it is albumin, fresh frozen plasma, dextran and Hase. Hydroxyethyl starch, short form we call HES, Hase. While crystalloid can be normal saline, dextrose normal saline and Ringer's lactate. These are some of the crystalloids. And electrolyte free water, or we call as a hypotonic solutions. These are isotonic or hypertonic. These are by and large isotonic, some are hypertonic. And blood, mainly if you want to give, it is mainly in the form of a packed red cells. So these are the main classification which you can utilize practically. And it is very, very important to know. This slide I have already discussed before. You can divide into hypotonic, isotonic, hypertonic, ionic and non-ionic. Now little idea, because this is very important. Normal saline contains 308 milliequivalent of osmolality, because 154 milliequivalent of sodium and 154 milliequivalent of chloride, which makes 308. This is more than your plasma osmolality, which is around 285 to 290. So this is close to isotonic, but little extra quantity of sodium and chloride. So this is containing excess of sodium. So should not be utilized in a person with hypernatremia. So should be avoided in that. Well, this contains less amount of sodium and chloride. So it is 154. So that's why half normal saline is hypotonic, and it becomes a IV fluid of choice in a person with hypernatremia. While 3% saline, which is containing 1026 milliequivalent of sodium, this is hypertonic, and this is only utilized in a severe hyponatremia. So this becomes very important. You should know regarding how much sodium, how much chloride, what is the osmolality, etc. and in which condition you can utilize. Ringer's lactate osmolality is close to our plasma. That's why it is called as a normal physiological, close to physiological IV fluid, which is containing 130 milliequivalent of sodium, which is our plasma. Chloride is close to our plasma. Lactate will be converted into bicarbonate by liver, and it will help in acidosis. So it is a fluid of choice in presence of acidosis. Potassium is only 4. So usually it does not produce much amount of hyperkalemia, but should be considered as relative contraindication if the person has got severe hyperkalemia. Should not be utilized. It contains little amount of calcium. So that is the advantage of Ringer lactate. So it is a normal physiological solution, very clearly can be utilized, and it is usually the common choice for maintenance as well as for replacement. And good number of time it is also utilized for resuscitation where you want to give little large volume. While plain dextrose, 1 liter of dextrose contains 50 gram. Initially when you are giving, it is close to what we call as isotonic, but once the dextrose is utilized, it becomes hypotonic. Because once the glucose is utilized, metabolized, it is pure water, and that will dilute your vascular compartment, and water will be shifted from intravascular to extracellular and from extracellular into intracellular, leading to increase in intracellular compartment and can be dangerous in a person with head injury, with cerebral edema, raised intracranial pressure. In those conditions, it can be absolutely dangerous. So plain dextrose should not be given in a person with unconsciousness, cerebrovascular stroke, cerebral edema, raised intracranial pressure, intracranial hemorrhage, subarachnoid hemorrhage. In all these conditions, 5% dextrose should be avoided. I am simultaneously mentioning all these things. Dextrose normal saline, if you take, it becomes hypertonic. See this, 560 milliequivalent. But as soon as this is being utilized, now it becomes isotonic. So whenever you want to give energy plus salt, then dextrose normal saline is indicated. So you will have to select depending upon that. While Ringer lactate does not contain dextrose, and as it does not contain dextrose, the osmolality does not increase. So after even dextrose is utilized, see the osmolality. The milliequivalent is more than what is there in a plasma. So dextrose normal saline should be utilized when you want to give little energy plus you want to give a sodium. But these special solutions, what we call as 25% dextrose, is mainly hypertonic, and it will give in 100 ml 25 gram of glucose, which will be mainly indicated only in one condition, that is we call as hypoglycemia. So it is a special solution in special condition like hypoglycemia. And all dextrose solution should be avoided in a person with diabetic ketoacidosis and in a person with hyperosmolar non-ketotic coma, or we call as HONC. In those conditions, it should be avoided. While dextrose normal saline can be utilized in a person also who are on a hunger strike, where you want to give energy plus little amount of saline. So in that case, dextrose saline can be utilized. This is a chart which is showing you a colloid. This is a natural colloid which you prepare from blood, that is albumin, but 20% and 25% is hypertonic, 5% is iso, fresh frozen plasma is iso, and plasma protein 4% and 5% is also not natural. But artificial colloid which are very commonly utilized is dextran and ACE. These are the two common which are being utilized. So these are artificial colloids which we call synthetic colloids, and being synthetic, the chance of anaphylactic reactions are more, chances of coagulative disorders will be more. So anaphylaxis, coagulation disorders, and even they can produce AKI sometime, acute kidney injury. So always while giving this, you have to keep a watch on anaphylaxis, coagulative disorders, and person can go into acute kidney injury. and this colloid will be retained in plasma, that is intravascular compartment, for this duration of time. At your leisure time you can go through. Maximum is by Hess, and as far as albumin is concerned, it is maintained for 16 hours. But expansion is maximum by 25% albumin. So you have to keep a watch when you are giving albumin or whenever you are giving colloid. It will increase your plasma volume and it will maintain for this period of time. As well as some of the time it will further expand your plasma volume by absorbing fluid from extracellular compartment into intravascular compartment, and that will further increase your plasma volume and can produce retention of water in intravascular compartment and can lead to hypervolemia, left ventricular failure. Little difference between crystalloid and colloid. I'll mention two parts, that is as far as indication is concerned and as far as some of the side effect is concerned. As far as side effect is concerned, crystalloid do not have anaphylactic reaction and they are cheap, while colloid has got a very high chance of anaphylactic reaction, particularly synthetic preparations, and that is cost factor is always there. Colloids mainly is utilized in fluid resuscitations before you get a blood. So commonly it is utilized in a person who has got a massive blood loss. But always keep a watch on anaphylactic, and they are expensive. But also you have to keep a watch on over volumes. We call hypervolemia. It can expand the volume like anything. Also it is indicated in hypoglobulinemia. So while giving plasma, you can increase your globulin level. In case of burn also there is a loss of protein, so that in that condition, because you cannot give protein by means of crystalloids. So in burns, in hypoproteinemia, in fluid resuscitation with blood loss, in those conditions it is indicated. And very critically ill patient where crystalloid use, you cannot use crystalloids excessively. In that condition you can use colloid. But colloid is always a choice in all the three modes of treatment: maintenance, replacement, as well as resuscitation. So in hypoglycemia you cannot use colloid because it does not contain dextrose or any electrolytes. So in correction of acid base imbalance, in electrolyte imbalance, hypoglycemia, dehydration, colloid is the only choice. In intraoperative, postoperative and maintenance, again colloid is a choice. So always keep a watch and always select a fluid accordingly. So by and large we say that for maintenance, dextrose with normal saline is one of the choice, but I'll say dextrose, normal saline, Ringer lactate and normal saline. But normal saline do not contain dextrose. So if you don't require dextrose, then in maintenance you can use normal saline or Ringer lactate. Otherwise, because maintenance fluid do require dextrose, dextrose normal saline is of choice. Here it is half normal saline. So some people say dextrose with half normal saline is a better choice for maintenance. Best for replacement is Ringer lactate, second choice is normal saline. And last choice for special fluids, we know that 25% dextrose is for hypoglycemia. Sodium bicarbonate is required for acidosis, and potassium chloride is required for severe hypokalemia. So for that particular purpose now, for this particular purpose, now you should know which fluid contains good quantity of sodium, which will be required for treatment of hyponatremia, which fluid contains potassium, which will required for hypokalemia, but at the same time The fluid which is rich in sodium should not be given in hypernatremia. The fluid which is rich in potassium should not be given in hyperkalemia. Which is the most physiological fluid? Answer is straight, ringer lactate. And what are the indication? What are the contraindication of IV fluids? I am brushing up very fast. 5% dextrose do not contain sodium, chloride, potassium, etc. So it is a pure dextrose with water. So less useful fluid, provides free water, no electrolyte, but dextrose is in a very small quantity. In a full liter, it contains only 50 gram in 1 liter. So it is mainly utilized as a vehicle for IV drugs. It is choice in case of hypernatremia. You want to give water only. You don't want to give sodium. And it is also used for prevention of ketoacidosis in starvation. So these are the common conditions, mainly hypernatremia and ketoacidosis in starvation prevention. It is utilized. It should not be given contraindicated in cerebral edema as a resuscitation fluid because it will produce hyponatremia, and should never be mixed with blood because it will produce RBC will swell up and they will rupture. Now we go to the second fluid. It is rich in sodium. This is little more than what is required daily. Daily requirement is 100 only. It gives little extra. So it will be of a choice in a person with a borderline hyponatremia. And it will give sodium as well as water. So it is indicated in vomiting, hypovolemic shock, metabolic alkalosis, because by giving chloride, it will try to neutralize bicarbonate. It is also indicated in hypovolemic hyponatremia and diabetic ketoacidosis. It will be useful. So these are the common. The first 4 are more common indications, and in diabetic ketoacidosis, it is the second choice after ringer lactate. Where it should be avoided, because it is containing little extra quantity of sodium, so it should be avoided in CKD, AKI, volume overload like congestive heart failure, cirrhosis of liver, severe hypertension, etc. So in this condition, normal salines should be avoided. Ringer lactate is the most physiological solution which is close to your normal plasma, close to your normal requirement, sodium, little amount of potassium. Lactate will help you to neutralize your little amount of acids, and osmolality is close to your normal plasma. So it contains sodium, potassium as well as chloride and bicarbonates. Indirectly bicarbonate. This lactate is bicarbonate. So we'll tell you in which condition this should not be utilized. If there is a liver damage, ringer lactate should not be used because lactate will be retained and it will produce lactic acid acidosis. So it will increase your acidosis if ringer lactate is utilized in severe liver damage. So chronic liver damage or acute liver damage, ringer lactate should not be utilized. Or also it should not be utilized in alkalosis, metabolic alkalosis. So it is a most physiological fluid, does not provide calorie. So if you don't require calorie, then this is the best solution physiological. There is no magnesium, no phosphorus. So if a person who is having a magnesium imbalance cannot be utilized. You can give a large volume without a risk of electrolyte imbalance. So most advantage, maximum advantage. And it is also ideal for rapid infusion. So if you want to give as a bolus also, it is good. Contains adequate quantity of sodium. So it is good even in a short stage. It contains lactate which will be converted into bicarbonate by liver, so useful in a metabolic acidosis. So indication comes resuscitation fluid in case of hypotension, replacing fluid in a surgical patient as maintenance fluid pre-operative, during surgery and post-operative. You can give a rapid and a large volume in diarrhea, burns, fractures, etc. You can utilize in diabetic ketoacidosis where it is a first choice, second choice is normal saline. You can utilize for irrigation of body cavity wounds also. So it is of choice. Contraindication: high sodium, and because of this it should be used with caution. Any person who has got excess of body fluid, like AKI, CKD, congestive heart failure, cirrhosis of liver, it, it should be also avoided in metabolic alkalosis and in a person with a head injury. So try to avoid in those conditions. So sodium concentration is 154 milliequivalent in normal saline. So you can see here in isolate solutions it is less, sodium is less, but it is adequate in ringal lactate, what is normal required, and it is, as far as the normal saline is concerned, it is little in excess. But 3% saline will have a 51 milliequivalent of sodium or 3 gram of normal saline. So it is containing a very huge quantity of sodium. So it has to be used only in patient with a severe hyponatremia. The solution which contains potassium. So the solution which contains potassium are isolite M, isolite P, isolite G, plasmolites, etc. Ringal lactate contains only 4 milliequivalent. So it can be safely given in a person which will not produce more amount of potassium imbalance. But in a person with a severe hypokalemia, you can utilize isolite M, which is having a highest percentage of potassium. But while giving that, you have to keep a watch on potassium balance. So these are the usual solution not being commonly utilized because they can easily produce potassium imbalance, particularly hyperkalemia. Which fluid does not contain glucose? Isotonic saline, ringal lactate, and plasmolites. They do not contain glucose. The fluid which does not contain sodium is pure dextrose, does not contain sodium at all. And low sodium is there in isolite M, P, etc. Potassium is available or in ringal lactate 4 milliequivalent, but in isolite solution you have to look at what is the concentration. But potassium is not present in isotonic saline, that is normal saline, dextrose normal saline, or any dextrose solution. So you will have to select accordingly. And this is a chart which is showing you entirely what we have discussed before, that is normal saline, half normal saline, 3%, dextrose normal saline, pure dextrose, ringal lactate, what is the concentration of sodium, chloride, potassium, calcium, glucose, any bicarbonate if it is present, what is the osmolality, what is the tonicity, and in which it is commonly indicated. So you can see in a resuscitation, commonly saline and ringal lactate will be most common for that. And for maintenance, usually we use dextrose normal saline or dextrose half normal saline is most commonly utilized as maintenance. While in a hypernatremia, mainly you will utilize pure dextrose and 3% saline in severe hyponatremia. whatever we have mentioned before, ringer lactate contraindications and saline when given, all those whatever we have mentioned is again mentioned here. Ringer lactate is the most physiological IV fluid. Isotonic saline and dextrose normal saline has maximum sodium. Isotonic saline, dextrose normal saline and isolite G has maximum chloride. Isolite E, P and M are directly correct acidosis because it contains bicarbonate. Isolite G is the only IV fluid which directly corrects metabolic alkalosis. But you have to keep a watch on potassium while you are using isolite solutions. So isolite M, P, G, E and ringer lactate are usually avoided in renal failure. So all these solutions should be avoided in renal failure. Isolite G and ringer lactate are avoided in patients with a liver failure because they contain material which will be metabolized into bicarbonate. So it should be avoided in a liver failure and that will produce alkalosis. Ringer lactate, if it is given in a liver failure, it will accumulate lactate and will produce acidosis. Isotonic saline and ringer lactate do not contain glucose. So preferred solution in a diabetic patient. 5%, 10% and 20% dextrose are only fluid which do not contain sodium chloride. And even isolite MP has got low sodium and low chloride. Normal saline, dextrose normal saline do not contain potassium, so they do not correct metabolic acidosis and alkalosis directly. So whatever we have mentioned before, same again is mentioned here. These are different types of fluids. Most physiological is ringer lactate, rich in sodium, which you will give in hyponatremia is normal saline, dextrose normal saline, rich in chloride, usually in a hypochloremia person who is getting persistent vomiting, normal saline, dextrose, isolite G. Potassium is isolite solutions. Correction for acidosis, ringer lactate. Correction of alkalosis, isolite G. In renal failure, you should not use ringer lactate, isolite G and GEMP. In liver failure, ringer lactate and isolite G should not be utilized. Glucose-free solution in diabetic ketoacidosis is normal saline and ringer lactate. For sodium-free in hypoglycemia, 10%, 25% dextrose. For starvation ketoacidosis, again, you can utilize dextrose or you can utilize dextrose normal saline. Potassium free, particularly in hyperkalemia, you can use normal saline, dextrose normal saline. This will be the first choice in hyperkalemia. So these are all the different solutions. There are some other additional solutions which you should have knowledge, little knowledge. Mannitol is mainly utilized for raised intracranial pressure. Hypertonic salines for severe hyponatremia. Dextran is mainly utilized as a colloid for resuscitation in severe hypovolemia. Soda bicarb in acidosis, potassium chloride in hypokalemia, 25% dextrose in hypoglycemia. Fructose should not be utilized as far as possible because it can lead to the person who is sensitive to fructose intolerance. Antibiotics are utilized for septic shock, multivitamins, TPN solutions for total parenteral nutrition, etc. This is one thing what we have told you, that invert sugar, that is fructose, should not be utilized in certain conditions, but it is indicated in dehydration, especially during pregnancy and in liver disease to prevent glycogen depletion, but should not be utilized in fructose intolerance. Severe renal and hepatic impairment, it should be avoided as far as possible. It can give rise to lactic acid acidosis, hyperuricemia and hypophosphatemia. So you should keep in mind when you are using that in a large quantity. As far as the fluid in a sepsis is concerned, you should avoid starch, gelatin, saline and glucose. While you should use more of blood, albumin 20% and balanced fluid depending upon the clinical picture. So fluid strategy is very, very important in sepsis as well as in ICU who requires emergency treatment. So this is the type of a fluid. This is the most important, little complicated. Now we go to what quantity you utilize. A very simple thing. You can calculate quantity only in case of maintenance fluid. It is extremely difficult to calculate in a resuscitation or in a person in whom you want to get replacement, that is maintenance for plus ongoing loss. But normally we divide into four groups: hypovolumic patient, hypervolumic patient, and person with nil by mouth, that is pre-operative, during surgery and immediately after surgery. A person who has got a normal volumic shock, you will usually require inotropes to be given with IV fluids. In that, you don't require a volume, you require inotropes for corrections because there is no volume loss. And any person who can take orally, there should not be any IV fluids. So try to divide into four groups: hypovolumic, hypervolumic, normovolumic, and person who are normovolumic with nil by mouth. So depending upon that, you will have to decide what to give. Say in a person with hypovolumic, you will require volume plus corrections of electrolyte, acid base imbalance, etc. In hypervolumic, it is contraindicated. Still, you have to decide if you want to give some drugs treatment, etc., how to give. In a nil by mouth, mainly you require a maintenance fluid. While in a normovolumic, you give a drugs treatment for the disease where you don't require a volume. So you have to select a fluid accordingly depending upon the etiology of normovolumic shock. Plus, you have to look at the associated conditions. So in a hypovolemic, you require mainly resuscitation and replacement, and later on maintenance. In hypervolemic, almost you have to think 10 times before giving a IV fluid. In nil by mouth, purely maintenance. In normovolemic, with shock stage, resuscitation. So by and large, in a resuscitation, there is no calculation. There is no calculation. And resuscitation can be hypovolumic, normovolumic. So depending upon that, in a hypovolumic, you will require a volume plus resuscitation. While for maintenance, there are two formula. One formula which is for children, which is called 4-2-1 formula, which is for children, for maintenance therapy in children. And for adults, there is a different calculation we call as a weight plus 40. So, 40 plus age, not weight. So, we'll explain you that further. In a maintenance, you may require a water plus calorie plus electrolytes plus vitamin, etc., which is your daily requirement. So, you require a fixed quantity. While in replacement, usually you require fixed quantity, that is maintenance plus ongoing loss, that is for correction. And usually this is not to be given rapid at an average speed. So by and large, this maintenance and replacement are with an slow speed, not a rapid speed. While in a resuscitation, you require a rapid corrections. And for that purpose, you sometimes require a large volume for correcting in a hypovolumic shock. So volume will depend upon that. So maintenance, replacement, resuscitation. So here we are having two different formula. One, it is said that in 24 hours, if you want to calculate, you utilize 100, 50 and 20 rule. And if you want to calculate in hour, you utilize 4-2-1. That is here 100 ml per kg for first 10 kg, 50 ml for next 10 kg, and 20 ml for every kg above 20 kg. So say if a person is of 20 kg, then first 100 ml for first 10 kg. So per kg, so 100 multiplied by 10, that is 1 liter. And then second 50 multiplied by 10, that is 500. So 1500 ml to be given in entire day if a child is a 20 kg. And say child is 22 kg, then for that extra 2 kg, another 40 ml. So accordingly you calculate. While if you want to calculate by 4 to 1, 4 ml for 10 kg, 2 ml for next 10 kg per kg, and 1 ml for further. So depending upon the body weight, say 20 kg if it is there, then first 40, then another 10, 20, so 60 ml in 1 hour approximately. So 60 ml you have to give in 1 hour. And here, if we calculate, it is coming to 1500 ml in 24 hours. So it comes nearly same. But this is a better because this is for a short period, and then depending upon the improvement, you can change the dose. You can change the volume. So this is 4 to 1 at your leisure time. Again, you can easily go through. But mainly utilized for pediatric purpose. And if you want to utilize for adult, straightforward, weight plus 40. So suppose if any person, say I am weighing 75 kg. So 75 plus 40, 115 ml per hour will be the volume which I'll require for maintenance. This cannot be utilized for replacement, cannot be utilized for resuscitation. So resuscitation is for acute corrections, for saving life. Usually you will have to find out whether it is normovolumic, euvolumic or hypervolumic and requires a resuscitation. Replacement is maintenance for plus what we call is ongoing loss. And during replacement of IV fluids, you have to stabilize the person, you have to rehydrate the patient, and you have to maintain the daily requirement. While maintenance is for optimization, that is, you have to maintain the optimum level of water, electrolyte, etc. in a person, and that we call as a maintenance. So usually for resuscitation, we call resuscitation is for saving life, replacement is for stabilization and rehydration, maintenance is for optimization, and after everything is done, now if the person is able to take orally and if the person is stable, is well hydrated, now you slowly, we call de-escalation. So slowly you decrease the quantity of fluid and stop. And daily fluid requirement, daily fluid replacement should be 700 plus urine output. So if urine output is 1500, 700 plus 1500, 2.2. So we roughly say 2 to 2.5 liter will be your daily requirement. So we normally divide into resuscitation, maintenance, replacement. These are the three common words which we already explained you, and to maintain the nutrition. So that is another word you should utilize. Now this is just one example. 1 liter of normal saline gives you sodium which is available in 50 bags of these chips. So such high quantity of sodium you get by giving only 1 liter of saline. So do keep it in mind, it contains a large quantity of sodium. So it can produce that. This is a standard algorithm which is being utilized by NICE, that is National Institute of Health and Care Excellence, where step 1 is assessment, step 2 is fluid resuscitation, step 3 is routine maintenance, and step 4 is replacement and redistribution. So these are the 4 steps which are being utilized very frequently. You can go at your leisure time. I've already discussed majority of them. This is another thing which is utilized by, we call as a National Health Society, which is in UK. we call news National Early Warning Score, in which they utilize respiratory rate, oxygen saturation, how much is requirement of oxygen, temperature, systolic blood pressure, heart rate, and level of consciousness. And these are the parameters which are utilized for monitoring your IV fluid therapy. At your leisure time, you can go through. This is indirectly assessment plus monitoring. How much quantity, volume you want to give can be assessed by assessment on these parameters, and then you can utilize the same parameter how he improves by replacing the fluid. So fluid resuscitation can be assessed by blood pressure, urine output, JVP, and urine sodium concentration. A simple most, instead of urine serum concentration, also you can utilize urine specific gravity, and even you can add PEC cell volume. Excess of fluid and lack of fluid, hypovolemic shock. Anxiety, confusion, tachypnea, hypotension, rapid pulse, tachycardia, low volume pulse, cold clammy extremities, decreased urine output, disturbed consciousness, and decreased temperature are the signs of hypovolemic shock. Always there is a question when to start, when to stop, when to remove, when to stop removal, etc. So it is always a problem when to start, when to stop, when to start removal, and when to stop removal. So there are few words which we have already utilized: resuscitation, optimization, that is by maintenance, stabilization, that is we call replacement fluid, and then you taper off, that is we call evacuation, that is de-escalation. So these were the two main chapters. As far as the route is concerned, you can give by normal route which is utilized is mainly the intravenous sites, but you can utilize also other routes like we call long-term use. You can utilize PICC line, Hickman lines, triple lumens, etc. Or we can call central lines. You can utilize any one of those. By and large, the most common route which is being utilized is IV. Peripheral IV line, this is triple lumen, this is introducers, which are that called cordis. In children, you can utilize intraosseous, and these are all called as a central catheters, different types of central catheters, Hickman lines or peripheral central lines or PICC peripheral lines. So you can utilize any one of this. I'm not going into detail regarding that. Now, as far as the rate is concerned, very simple thing. For maintenance, usually slow because you have to give it in 24 hours. For replacement and resuscitation will depend upon the clinical condition. By and large, in resuscitation, you might require rapid. But in a person who are having, say, cardiogenic shock, anaphylactic shock, you require a rapid injection of one particular drug, you will have to give rapid. But in certain person, some drug has to be given by micro drips, then it is slow. So usually in replacement and resuscitation, it will depend upon what you are giving in IV fluids and what is the requirement. So in a shock, severe hypotension, you might require to give a bolus therapy. So even in AKI also, you might have to give a bolus therapy. So in a hypovolemic shock, you require a frequent bolus therapy. But whenever you want to give some drugs which are mainly given in the form of a micro drips, like dobutamine, vasopressor drugs, you can give by infusion pumps or you can give by micro drips. And in those conditions, it is very, very slow. And for the rate calculations, you can utilize some of this. How to administer. So usually nowadays these are available, what we call as a pumps are available, where you can calculate the rates, etc., and you can put it on, and then you can start an IV drips in a bolus. Particularly say like in a hypoglycemia, you have to give a bolus of 25% dextrose, 100 ml, you will have to give in a short period. Say in a severe hypotension, you can give a bolus of 500 ml or 1 liter in half an hour or 1 hour. Depending upon that, you will decide whether to give rapid or not. So bolus are usually rapid, while what we call as the infusion pumps are usually very slow. Micro drips will be slow, while macro drips are usually for rapid infusions. So depending upon your requirement, if you are using macro, 10 drops are equal to 1 ml, while in a micro drips 15 drops are blood set will be 10 drops will be 1 ml, regular IV set will be 15 drops in 1 ml, and in micro drips 60 drops will be equivalent to 1 ml. So this you will have to keep it in mind, and depending upon that you will have to decide how much you want to give. Say you want to give 1 liter of fluid in 1 hour, then you will have to divide accordingly. So when you want to give slow, usually micro drips are utilized. When you want to give fast, usually regular sets are utilized, and little big bore needle is utilized. So depending upon that, you will the number of needle and micro drips, macro drips, or infusion pumps, you will decide accordingly. There is something called the rule of 10. To calculate the infusion rate for per day, you utilize rule of 10, and if you want to calculate for per hour, it is rule of 4. So at your leisure time, if you want to go through, you can go through at your leisure time. Say I want to calculate in 24 hours, then I will use the rule of 10 drops per minute, and I want to calculate in rule of 4, I'll utilize per hour. So then I will utilize rule of 4. So say as for example, I want to give fluid in liter per day. Say I want to give 1 liter in 1 day, then it will be 10 drops per minute. So this is 10 drops per minute. 1 multiplied by 10. I want to give 2 liters, so 20 drops per minute. I want to give 4 liters in a day, 40 drops per minute. Very simple. So it is said that 1 liter per day, say average I want to give 2 liters, so I'll give 20 liters per minute. So I will arrange the IV set so that I put a drop in 1 minute, 20 drops. That will be there in 24 hours. But say I want to calculate, I want to give rapid. So per hour I want to calculate. So if I want to give say 1 fluid in milliliter per hour, say I want to give 40 ml, then I will divide 40 divided by 4. So 10 drops per minute. I want to give half liter in 1 hour, then 500 divided by 4 will be 125 drops per minute. And this will be mainly if you want to calculate in 1 hour. So always utilize rule of 4 or rule of 10 when you want to calculate the drops. It is very simple, and this is mainly for resuscitation. This is for maintenance. By and large, this is for maintenance, and this is for resuscitation. So always utilize this. Extremely difficult to calculate the drops. If it is 80 drops per minute, very difficult to calculate. So always, depending upon that, calculate accordingly. So how to calculate in the rate of IV fluid infusion for a micro drips? It is number of micro drops per minute. So for a routine IV set, 1 ml is equal to 15 drops, and for micro 60 drops I have already explained. But best way is by using a pump. Last part now, when to stop. When blood pressure is maintained and sustained, hemostasis is achieved, your all targets are achieved, local or systemic complications are not there, absence of indications. So you will stop fluid, or there is a contraindication, like person has started developing JVP, breathlessness, there is tachycardia, there is an increase in central venous pressure, increase in blood pressure, all this will become contraindication. And if the blood pressure is maintained, target is achieved, and there is any systemic complications, you will stop. And if there is now no longer any indication, stop. So that is the time where you stop. There are some points to be remembered while you are giving an IV fluid. Monitor every 15 minutes. Don't just start and come after 2 hours or 3 hours and then look at the patient. By that time, you might have got a dangerous complication. So initially, you try to observe every 50 minutes after starting IV fluid. In a resuscitation, you have to be by the side of the patient. Check the type of solution, the site, rate, etc. Check any signs of edema, redness, streaking, pain or leakage. IV rounds should be made hourly. Bags should be changed every 24 hours. Label, dressing and tubing should be seen frequently and should be changed every 48 to 72 hours. Tubing should be changed. It should not be utilized for weeks and months. And monitoring is done by all these parameters we have already mentioned before. The most common is weight, skin turgor, tongue, sensorium, urine output, pulse rate. Very important is urine output, blood pressure and pulse rate. These are very, very important. These are clinical grounds. Another is hematocrit, central venous pressure. And even sometime while giving IV fluids, person can develop metabolic acidosis. These are all the different parameters which you can utilize. At your leisure time, you can go through. Some of the parameters which are very commonly utilized in sepsis is mean arterial pressure, central venous pressure, urine output, oxygen concentration, lactate level, mental status, etc. Always look for volume overload in the form of edema, JVP, dyspnea, basal crackles, particularly where you are giving a large quantity of a parenteral fluids, or if a person is having associated cardiovascular and renal disorders. Always keep it in mind. These are some of the findings which will come across: edema, basal crackles, orthopnea, cough, hypertension, JVP elevated, and strong rapid pulse, tachycardia with hypervolume. And as soon as you get that, stop the fluid, sodium restriction, fluid restriction, diuretics, and sometime you might require even dialysis. Complications, which are some of the complications are very common at the local site: infiltration, phlebitis. Person can develop hypothermia, local infections. These are local complications. These are systemic complications: extravasation of fluids, phlebitis, thrombosis, thrombophlebitis, local hematoma, local infections, venospasm, infiltration. You can create a nerve damage, and depending upon the fluid, you can even produce a local necrosis, etc. In a systemic complication, you can introduce infection from outside, septicemia, pyrogen fever, air embolism, good number of times, quite common, fluid overload, another very common complication, speed shock. By chance, if you are given a fluid with a very fast rate, you can produce a speed shock. It is described as a speed shock. And sometimes the tip of the catheter can also break and can produce catheter embolism. This is one slide showing you the local complication. You can see here there is a massive edema. This is necrosis, what has taken place. This is local reactions. This is thrombophlebitis, what has developed. You can see here thrombophlebitis. These are some of the complications. So I end my lecture here. So I finished regarding everything explanation regarding an IV fluids. I'll take interesting cases separately. So see you next time.